Hi, we're going to study the style of an author. An author's style is one of the most important skills that you can adapt as a reader. It is also a skill that you adapt as a writer. But in the area of literature, an author's style is the reason you read one author over and over and over again. It's because you happen to like the way they put a story together or the way that they put a piece of literature together. On your ITED that you'll be taking later this spring, you will find out that a lot of the questions in the junior ITED will have to do with style. They'll ask you a question, which of the following sentences most fits with the style of the piece of literature? So this is a great place for us to study that as we begin our unit on Romanticism. So our goal, our lesson objectives, is to analyze the style of an author. Well, what's the best way to identify what style is? Okay, style is like when you go to a store to buy a pair of tennis shoes or sneakers, if you want to call them that, and you pick a pair. And you pick a pair because it appeals to you because of its style. So some people might choose a more formal tennis shoe, whereas another one might be all about the Converse because they love the high-top look of it. Okay? So let's check for understanding. Style is a subjective response to the text. Subjective means that pretty much anybody's answer is appropriate. So when you're looking at an author's style, what one person says is just as right as another. Is that a yes or a no? Well, the answer is no, because style is not subjective. Style is actually objective. Objective means that there's a set of criteria that you can use to determine what an author's style is. And that's what we're going to be working on, is what is the criteria we use to determine an author's style. Okay? Well, an author's style might be having to do with the idea of how you might look at events, objects, or ideas, because an author is going to choose a way to put a story together to establish its mood, its images, and the meaning by looking at events, objects, and ideas. So I want to kind of dust the cobwebs off of a story that you read when you were freshmen. If you remember, you read Edgar Allan Poe's Casca de Amontillado. I choose this as an example because Edgar Allan Poe was a romantic author, and we're going to be studying Romanticism in this next unit. Well, if you remember, the Casca de Amontillado was set during carnival season, and Fortunato took Montresor took Fortunato down into the catacombs and he killed them. They used the event of the party, to kind of set this mood that in one level everybody is excited and having a good time because it's carnival. And then the irony of it is that he was murdering him in the catacombs. The objects are like the trowel and if you remember, the Amontillado was a wine, and that he took him down and he talked about the trowel and the bones. And this whole concept kind of revolved around the idea of revenge. And so the way the author used to establish the mood and put the images in and the meaning, it's part of the author's style. And that's why Edgar Allan Poe has probably one of the most clear styles. Like if you read something, you kind of know it's his. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at 3 different pairs of style and understand that it's going, when you're reading a piece of literature, you're going to choose one or the other. Okay? The first set is informal or formal. An informal style is going to use slang and idioms and contractions and dialect. And a formal style is going to be very complex, very advanced vocabulary, very formal. And in this particular unit that we're going to be studying, most of the style of the authors that we're going to read are going to be formal. And that's just because it's in the early 1800s, shortly before the Civil War. The next pair is the journalistic or archaic style. Journalistic is probably what most people enjoy that read in the 21st century because they're short, simple sentences. There's very little emotions. They talk about the who, what, why, where, how, and it's journalistic. And so we tend to, in the modern era, like that style just a little bit more than what is called the archaic style. But some of us are old souls aren't we, Emily? And we tend to like the things that have a little bit of an older sound to it, complex sentences, and they tend to be a little bit longer as well. The final pairs that we have are what are called concrete and abstract. Concrete simply means that it's pretty straightforward. You're not talking about symbols, you're not talking about allegories or those kinds of things. Not a lot of similes, not a lot of metaphors. And abstract is just the direct opposite of that. Symbols and allegories and the use of figurative language. So those are the three sets of pairs that you might use. Whoops. The three sets of pairs that you might use when you're determining style. So let's take a look at some examples. Some of the best ways to kind of figure out what's the difference between informal and formal is to actually look at some samples. So for example, informally, we might say, "Give me a minute, will you?" You'll see that it sounds a little bit slangy because it's using the idiom, "give me a minute." You can't give anybody a minute. Formally, you might say, "It would be fortunate if you wait for a short while." Now, most of us in modern time would not say that, but that's a more formal style. Okay, so let's look at the next pair. So we have Ernest Hemingway, who was known for his journalistic style. He might say, "Wait for me," he said. Whereas Nathaniel Hawthorne might say, "Verily, it was a circumstance to be noted. It appeared that the event of waiting was upon us." Now, I don't know about you, but I almost have to go back and reread that going, what was he speaking? Well, it's very archaic, very old-fashioned. Concrete, the tree was green. Pretty clear-cut, the tree was green. But in an abstract sense, we might say that the emerald gem glistened in the morning light. Emerald meaning that it was green, the gem might be the tree, glistened in the morning light. So the idea behind that is that's very abstract. So when we're talking about things that affect style, how the author decides to put things together, it is about the emotions in the scene and the setting and the characters. So an author might determine the situation, depending on the situation that the author is using, will affect the style. So if they're telling a murder story, then of course the situation is different. If they're telling a romance story, that's a different situation. Okay. How about the speaker? Who the author decides to use as his narrator or his speaker to tell us the story. So in the case of To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, Harper Lee decided to tell us the story about racism through the eyes of an 8-year-old. And we know that that Scout started out at the age of 5, or close to 5 anyway, and that choosing that affected the style. And finally, who is your audience? And again, we go back to Kill a Mockingbird. Even though the story was set in the 1930s, Harper Lee knew that her audience was of the 1960s, and that affected her style. So she was able to tell us some things that maybe she couldn't have done if she would have chose to set the story in a different place. So situation, speaker, and audience affect an author's style. Okay. So yes or no, an author's style is his or her own identity. Take a moment and answer the question. If you take a look at it, the answer is yes. You are trying to identify the author's identity by looking at various qualities. Well, what are those qualities? Well, there are 11 of them, and you need to jot these down, and we actually need to really commit these to memory, because these particular 11 elements of style are going to be the things that we apply to the authors that we study in Romanticism. So the first one is alliteration. Remember, alliteration is like she sells seashells by the seashore. Figurative language, similes, metaphors, personification, and hyperbole. Irony, the opposite of what you expect to have happen. The use of situational, dramatic, and verbal irony. Okay. Sensory details. What I want you to do in your notes is to simply put the word imagery behind that, because sensory details is the ability for an author to tell us what we see, smell, taste, touch, and hear. Okay. Word choice, huge thing. Why does one author use the word green and another one use emerald? Tone. Are they using a sarcastic tone? Are they using a dark tone? Are they using a humorous tone? Onomatopoeia. Whoosh, bang, pow. Words that sound like the sound itself. Now, local color we're not going to use very much in this unit, but local color is the idea of setting up a region, like if an author uses a southern accent. Dialogue. Some authors are not going to have dialogue in their style. For example, Nathaniel Hawthorne does not have a lot of dialogue. It's paragraphs where he describes things, and some people think that that's really not fun to read, while others like that because they get confused by dialogue. Rhythm. That's not just the idea of using poetry, but rhythm is this idea of that all authors have kind of a beat behind it. Repetition is the next one. Repetition is what words do they choose to use over and over and over again to make it an element. I think that's it. Okay. Oops. All right, so let's go on. And what I want you to do at this time is to write down the words and see if you can create a mnemonic device that will help you remember these 11 elements of style. I have one that we've used for years, but sometimes when you create your own, that is the best way to go. All right, we will be using, we will continue with all of these notes a little bit later on. So make sure that you have these notes done because we are going to be using them throughout the rest of this unit. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.